So we had a Mrs. Smith on the end of our road who lived in a house very similar to this, a very mysterious, overgrown garden. And she hired us to come and clear it out. And it was my older brother and I, and we would work there. And it was strangely full of thorn bushes and poison ivy and insects. I mean, we lived 2 houses away, but it was like a whole different flora and fauna over there. And she it up well in her backyard, which was super creepy. And of course, we were teens and preteens. So that just, for me, especially got my imagination just going wild. And when we pulled out a bunch of these weeds and overgrown plants, we saw that a long time ago there had actually been an organized garden in there. There were beds and there were little statues that we were finding kind of shrouded in dead plant material. And it was very mysterious.
This is Story to Count with Jen Jumba. In conversations with writers, something magical happens, and as readers, we begin to see them as human beings and not just the name on the spine of a book. My hope is through these conversations, you learn about their craft and them as a person. You'll become like me, fiercely loyal, want to read their current book, entire backlist, any future book or any book they blurb. And when you see their name, you'll want to support them, not only as incredible storytellers, but also the thoughtful individuals you have come to know. Ellery Adams is my guest today, and she's the New York Times and USA Today best-selling writer of more than 40 mystery novels, which star female characters who are nuanced and complex, which is one of the reasons why readers adore her work. She's written multiple series, including The Secret, Book and Scone Society, had me at all three, The Book Retreat, and Books by the Bay. For much of her career, Ellery has explored how the power of women's relationships can change a community for the better, and at that same time, societal pressures to be perfect can twist a woman's spirit into something unlovely. There are echoes of both in Ellery's latest book, Invasive Species, which just published last week. Invasive Species is challenging for me to quote-unquote define, and thankfully somebody has found the words to describe it as a genre-defying blend of mythology, fantasy, and folklore horror with a nostalgic coming-of-age story. And this new book continues to feature women who are fascinating and drive the story. One person has said, think Circe meets Stranger Things. Agreed. And I'm so excited to talk to Ellery today about her approach to writing such complicated characters, how she's able to capture that duality that always exists, and how our actions impact not only our life, but the lives of others. So I'm so excited to have you here today.
I am thrilled to be here.
Can we talk a little bit about this new book, Invasive Species? Give us a kind of a brief overview of this.
I'm chomping at the bit
story.
to talk about invasive species. So I'm so with you in it's actually just so hard to define. And when people are like, oh, give me your elevator pitch, I'm like, duh.
Well, yeah, it's when you need the elevator that goes to the top of the Empire State Building
Right,
twice.
exactly. I'm like, how many floors you got? Because this is going to.
Right.
And I think whenever you have a genre blend or a mashup,
Mhm.
you're trying to put in all the sections. So you're like, look, this is going to be this amazing cookie dough. And as soon as you cook it, it's going to be this great cookie. But let me just get everything into the dough.
Right.
So I'll try to say this as succinctly as possible. But it's kind of a 1980s era suburban drama. So I've heard a lot of references to Desperate Housewives, and I agree with that, putting that in 1982. And then it's focusing on three women who are kind of slowly unraveling in the face of all of their societal pressures, because this is the time period where the slogans and the mottos for women were, you can have it all, but to have it, doing it all. So these women, Natalie, Elaine, and Beth, they kind of direct their frustration and disappointment over marital issues, monetary issues, parenting issues on this mysterious neighbor who is just called Mrs. Smith. And she's mysterious because no one has ever seen her. She lives in this hulking, creepy, shark gray Victorian overlooking the harbor. And she doesn't interact with any of the neighbors. So it's really easy to talk about a woman you don't see and you don't interact with. So she starts off right away as kind of this enigmatic, negative figure. And as the story progresses and we get the point of view of the different women, we see what is happening with their in their lives. And then we also see what is going on with Mrs. Smith. We get her point of view as well. And then we have some unlikely heroes. And this is where the coming of age part comes in with the 12-year-old Jill, who's Natalie's daughter, and her Icelandic housekeeper, whose name is Una. And they really find all the answers to their problems, like the rest of us do at the library.
It was a nice nod to the library and thinking that it's set in 1982. There is that nostalgic feel for many of us of a particular age to remember what it was like. There's no internet, there's no cell phones, there's no texting, there's no social media, that you were truly in that present moment, and how angst ridden that can sometimes be without that escape or distraction. So I'm struck by the fact that these women find something in common to kind of not like something that they know nothing about. Right, but it kinda comes to a head because Elaine wants to throw this fabulous bar mitzvah for her son, Charles, who's kind of the outcast in his class, and, like, we're talking epic, we're talking fireworks, all kinds of things, and they need her permission, and so sets this story in motion, is trying to understand her and trying to get to know her, and will she make an appearance and how she does that?
But all this time of just not caring about her existence, and now they need something from her. And
Mhm.
so she's become relevant because of their own needs and desires. And Natalie also wants Mrs. Smith to clean up her property because she thinks that her messy property is going to drive down property values. And she's trying to sell a house that borders on Mrs. Smith's property. So now Natalie wants something from her. Elaine wants something from her. She needs to get permission to set off fireworks at midnight because Mrs. Smith's property borders the yacht club where the party is going to be. And now these women who have never paid attention to Mrs. Smith are going to get somewhat aggressive with her. And that turns out to be quite a mistake.
There's sometimes we say there's power in numbers. The more you have united against something, but what a slippery slope it creates.
Right.
And what an awkward way to meet a neighbor is somebody who you have basically vilified and now you need something from. Like, that's a humbling, could be perceived as a humbling ask. Like, oh, yeah, we don't really like you. We talk about you all the time, but oh, by the way, we need your help.
Right. And speaking of people of a certain age, for those of you who remember when you would go to trick or treat in the 80s or the 70s and someone's lights were out, that was a clear indication that we don't have candy for you and we don't want you to come to our house. Go away. And that was something at the time we very much respected. Unless we had some toilet paper, then they might get punished. But I
Exactly.
those kids because I was a total rule follower and I was terrified of doing something to an adult. But
Right.
in a neighborhood teeming with kids and families, if you were the only house on the block with the light out on Halloween, that kind of automatically puts you in villain territory.
Without a doubt. And you become the house that people dare to go up to the porch and like knock on the door and like hell, right? There's already creating this tension. This is somebody who clearly does not want to be part of a group. And growing up in the 80s was all about neighborhood, and people were always outside. People always were cooking out. You kind of knew everybody kind of looked out for each other's kids, so to speak. Like, I can remember coming home and like my parents asking me something like, how did you know? Well, so and so saw you do blah, blah, blah.
Worked against us too because parents would tell on us for things we did at other people's houses. Like there was no sanctuary in someone's basement because you were in someone's basement. For me, if I had sugary snacks at someone's house and my mom found out, I'd get in trouble. My friend, like, don't let your mom see me having Captain Crunch with Crunch Berries because my mom will be mad. We're only allowed to have nuts and mulch, aka grape nuts.
The grape nuts, I think you describe in this story as there's humor throughout this story. So you talk about grape nuts being totally disgusting. It was like eating twigs and acorn caps. No
Yeah,
kidding. No, I mean,
I have
it's
never had a bowl of grape nuts since.
no. I think I tried it once and then I was like, "Okay, no, thank you." That was kind of the rule growing up, you at least try it. But yeah, that's a hard no, and also no sugary cereal. So I can remember going to college and like, oh my gosh, there was every sugar-coated cereal you could ever want and thinking like, "This is the greatest thing ever."
You're like, "I'm in heaven."
I'm in heaven. Exactly. So there is humor woven throughout. There's also the dark folk horror throughout because people trying to figure out, who Mrs. Smith is. I mean, the fact that she just goes by Mrs. Smith, there's already that distance because you've put like the Mrs., Mr., Ms. in front of a last name. Not like you and I, if I were to call you, Ms. Adams, throughout the rest of the interview, it'd be kind of a little bit awkward.
Right.
So I'm thinking about that, and then I'm thinking about, there's themes in here of what people are willing to do for money. Natalie is just started after raising kids, decides to go back to work, wants to be a real estate agent, and of course, being the rookie, she gets like the worst possible house because it's adjacent to Mrs. Smith's property, and it's overgrown and unsightly. So she has this idea for curb appeal. I'm going to go and I'm going to make it look nice. And, hopefully people can see past that. But what she does in trying to, I guess, befriend Mrs. Smith to get her to cut the vines back that are encroaching on other people's property, her kids going to help.
This is all very autobiographical, actually. So we had Mrs. Smith on the end of our road who lived in a house very similar to this. And
Oh,
a very mysterious, overgrown garden. And she hired us to come and clear it out. And it was my older brother and I, and we would work there. And it was strangely full of thorn bushes and poison ivy and insects. I mean, we lived 2 houses away, but it was like a whole different flora and fauna over there. And she it up well in her backyard, which was super creepy. And of course, we were teens and preteens. So that just, for me, especially got my imagination just going wild. And when we pulled out a bunch of these weeds and overgrown plants, we saw that a long time ago there had actually been an organized garden in there. There were beds and there were little statues that we were finding kind of shrouded in dead plant material. And it was very mysterious. Now, I don't ever remember seeing this woman. My older brother said he saw her once. So my idea of having this person who may or may not be an agoraphobic or extremely shy in this book was based on the fact that I grew up next to somebody I don't ever remember seeing. So I've asked my parents about it, and they said, yes, she was extremely shy. She also had a lot of money, but you wouldn't necessarily know it because she lived very quietly and modestly, and she didn't have kids. And as we all know, there are time periods in life, and unfortunately still now, where women are judged for not having kids as being strange. And if don't have kids and you're strange and you've got this overgrown garden and you turn out your porch light, I mean, you're in trouble in the neighborhood.
you're already sending a clear
You
message.
are in so much trouble. But my mom, there were 3 of us, and she at one point was like, "All right, you guys are good. You're on the way to being decent human beings, and I gotta get out of the house. I gotta get out of here. I want to do something else." And so she decided she had a science background, but she went through a negative incident before she left her last job. And it was a long time. And women who had spent 10 years, 15 years raising kids, and then they went to try to get another job, it was, well, what's your experience? What's your value? And they were basically, the insinuation is you have none, even though the incredible talent and work and organization it takes to raise children is beyond something to fit on a resume, right? But real estate was something that she could get into without going back to school, which was really important. And, I remember her telling me stories because at that point, I was kind of taking care of my younger brother while she was at work. And she would come home with these stories about the gross things she had to clean and the smells and all this stuff. And I thought, well, this is not glamorous. But man, she was determined to
Right.
rise to the top and be good at this job. And I was insanely proud of her because it was nothing in her background. And as a self absorbed 12-year-old, I didn't really think about what it cost her, what it cost her to go to work and then also still be in charge of the house and us. And if one of us needed new socks or if I needed cookies for, a sports team, that was still all down to her.
It's fascinating. I just read a book called Invisible Women, and it's all about the data gap that exists because every study, everything that they do is based on a male. And without that female perspective as well as data, things are flawed. The cars we drive in are flawed because all the crash test dummies are men, and men are anatomically different than we are. And then the other thing that they talked about is the value of running a household and raising a family, and how, to your point, you can't capture all of that on a resume, but you're like the CEO of a household and all the things that
Right.
you have to do and you have to meet and make sure everybody's on track. I mean, that is so valuable, but unfortunately somewhat dismissed in our society. Like, I would challenge any CEO to try to run a household who's running a company right now and be like, okay, how do you do it? How do you
Right. With 3 kids and dogs. And
exactly?
yeah,
And your kids are
I'd
involved
love to
in,
see it. Right.
yeah.
I'd love
I
to
think
see
that
it.
would be a great reality show. You take a CEO from,
Friday, we could do like freaky boardroom. Right.
it's exactly right. That would be so
Managerial swap.
I find the whole thing fascinating that your characters, the women, they're strong. They have a sense of agency at a time period where that was still kind of sad to say, like up and coming.
Mhm.
And the coming of age story with Jill, who's Natalie's daughter, there were like reminders almost of like the Nancy Drew and the Trixie Belden of wanting to understand and kind of crave knowledge and kind of solve something or answer something that was perplexing. So that was quite fun to see that as well. When you were growing up, and you talk about somewhat being autobiographical, did you ever think you would write a story about it? Were you always a writer at that age?
I actually was. I used to write stories, sell them on the school bus. I don't know
That's
why,
awesome.
I always that I should get paid for it. Like you're not going to get these books for free. And they were so deliberate and a little bit manipulative, I have to admit, because I'd write these stories for my girlfriends. Whatever rushing on, right? It was all this, oh, I love Bobby. In the story, Bobby wouldn't notice her. And then she'd have some Cinderella esque glow up. And then see her from across the room and he'd have little hearts over his head. And at the end, they were like getting married and more hearts over their heads. And I would charge a quarter for these things. I was basically writing like penny romances, so to speak,
Yeah.
on the bus. And I would illustrate them too. And my illustrations were not great. But so I graduated from that. My grandfather, who was kind of a Renaissance man, he lived in Florida, and would come up to visit and he would say, okay, what are you writing now? And he was not one of these, oh, this is great just because I was his granddaughter and I wrote it. He would have the red pen behind his ear and he'd pull it out and he'd be like, well, what else could you tell us about this section? Right? And
What?
he didn't have a teacher background, he was a dentist, but he had also, done, like, a master's degree on the 7 deadly sins, and he spoke multiple languages, and he played instruments, and he was a painter. So he was just
Wow.
really in art and creation of art, and he was always pushing me, so I would started writing more stories, and I would send them to him in Florida, and he would send them back with all of these red marks. And if I corrected them and edited them and made them better, then I would get rewarded with usually like, this is the strangest combo, a package of hard candy butterscotch er,
Okay.
and a jar of sweet gherkin pickles because he and I both loved pickles and butterscotch candy. So I was basically bribed with salt and sugar to become a better writer by my grandfather.
What a wonderful story, though.
Yeah, I was really into it, and when I got bored in class, I would start writing stories, which is why I barely passed any math class. My brain just doesn't work with numbers, and so I got in trouble all the time because then I'd write about somebody in class and I would pass it over to them. So my notes were all these little fictional anecdotes, and I tried to make people laugh, because I was very insecure about being so bad at math. So I turned to kinda like the Joker thing, and, I was constantly getting in trouble for writing stories when I was supposed to be doing geometry, but, hey, I've never needed geometry. I just wanna say that in public.
And I would say, like, the butterscotch and the sweet, gherkin pickles, certainly worked because to have published, over 40 novels and then this Invasive Species, which is unlike anything else I've ever read, absolutely loved it. So character driven, and at the same time, there's the sense of setting, and then the myriad of plots and the nuances and the layers. I mean, it's really hard sometimes to break it down to your point of an elevator pitch. How can you possibly? I think it's a great book for discussion. So for those of you listening, book discussion groups, there's so many things to ponder and to think about. Can we talk a little bit about Mrs. Smith? I mean, the opening scene has her sitting basically in the tub reading a Cosmo magazine and then gets frustrated by what it says and so throws it. I think we've all been there with, you know, reading stories of what we're supposed to do or supposed to look like.
I think particularly beauty magazines, especially from that period, my memory isn't that great, so I did pick up a couple of copies of Cosmo from eBay. First of all, I was really shocked by how expensive they were. I was like, "Come on, it's just a Cosmo magazine. It's just ads and then, like, a great quiz maybe." You know?
Yes.
I mean, not to diminish Cosmo, but when I read it when I was younger, there was so many pages to skip. But I kind of was using Cosmo as a mirror a little bit to the 1980s, and Jill, who's the 12-year-old, really has body issues, and Ellery, as a 55-year-old, still has the same body issues, so that
It will
way.
resonate. A lot of us do.
Right, but I think that magazines really amplified any of our insecurities back then, which was ironic considering the '80s were going for this women are bold, women are confident. That was kind of the whole '80s vibe, but you were only supposed to be bold or confident if you looked like Brooke Shields, which very few of us did. And I particularly picked Brooke Shields because she was so young when she started. And also, I think she's astonishingly beautiful and really just cool. The current Brooke Shields is just really cool. And she was the kind of person I would look at when I was younger and be like, I wish I looked like her. And now Mrs. Smith is looking at Cosmo and thinking the things that the women in these magazines are concerned about are so dumb because they earn her. But the one area she can identify with is a woman who writes into the editor and says, I'm hungry all the time. I want to be thinner. I want to get into this other dress size, but I'm hungry. And Mrs. Smith is like, well, now this is a human I can relate to because I too am always hungry. And there is this idea of women that we're not supposed to be hungry. We're not supposed to have appetites. We're not supposed to have extreme desires because none of these things are feminine.
Right. Yeah, not supposed to be assertive because then we're bossy and all of
Right.
that.
Right. That we're monstrous. Any extreme emotion is monstrous.
Agreed. I just find it interesting, Mrs. Smith, some of the things that she talks about or just how like her hiddenness, her survival depended on being isolated and being alone. And then, there's also along with her, when we're talking about like her basically her lands just being kind of dilapidated and uncared for and somewhat wild. And you do such a great job in terms of description. Like there's this love of language. I have little sentences that I like write down and just so I can pull them out and read them over again. But you're describing her woods and saying they were made up of sharp, spindly trees crowded together like needles in a pincushion. And all of us, that image is such a powerful connection. So immediately we see exactly what it's like. So well done in terms of
Thank
finding
you.
the right way to explain things. I shouldn't say right way, a good way to explain things because it's so well done. And it's peppered throughout this novel. Some of the things that I love reading about books are the casual observances of everyday life. I mean, there's a scene where Jill's watching her mom kind of sweep the breadcrumbs off the table into the bowl of her hand and then toss it in the trash. Like those are gestures that we do all the time. And to see them captured in a novel, it's always something I'm a fan of. I mean, there's other things that happen to characters in books and novels that won't happen to us, but by the same token, there's just something very human about that experience.
I feel like the little details ground us, especially if we're reading a weird book. And this is, let's face it, this is a weird book. And I love those little details in books and also in film. I think that like Tyler and Ann Patchett, Jim Kent Kruger, all these guys, all
Yes.
that so many people that we were talking earlier about Lauren Groff. She's another one. And put in these little details and I'm here for it. Like I don't think that they slow down the pacing. I think they ground us and they put us in the scene. So I appreciate those little things. Like I love it when a character is like, I don't know, wiping something down with a sponge or folding a t-shirt a certain way because I'm there with them. I'm in the room with them and like, oh, well, I really understand you as a human being right now because I like how you clean your counter.
And there's even a moment in terms of liking characters where this is written from different perspectives, and we'll talk about that in a second. But Natalie's so frustrated with Gina, who's kind of the brown noser within the real estate firm. And just at one point, she's like, I just wanted to smack her and, watch, the five fingers of my hand spread on her face. And I was like, dude, we've all been there. So
Yeah,
capturing, I won't say who, but we've
right.
all had those moments where it's like, come on. Right. And so, yes, you feel at least I did when I was a reader, that I feel that I'm right there with the character. And because you chose, and we'll talk a little bit about this, why you chose to write it from multiple points of view kind of gives you that different perspective that you're sitting right there in that same space with that character. So, can you talk a little bit about offering multiple points of view in this writing?
I can. It was almost like if you can picture a statue of a woman who has a head with six faces. I just wanted the body to stay the same and then the face to rotate on that head. Like, here's another woman and what she's going through. Here's a young woman and what she's going through. Here's a mature woman and what she's going through. And here's a female who is not even human and what her motivations are. But they all carry a woman's shape. I wanted there to be some universal ties between them just as women. And then I also wanted them to be extremely unique. I was hoping that with every point of view, nobody would sound the same. And that was a huge challenge for me because I don't write that way in my mysteries. Everything, my mystery novels comes from the point of my main character. And yes, they're a kind of a fellowship, but it is a fellowship that circulates around one son, the main character. If the main character died in my mysteries, we would be in trouble. Any one of these women in this book could die and the book would go on only because I'm hoping that the other voices are strong enough. And they really, I needed there to be multiple women with multiple points of view to get all of my millions of points across. For example,
Right.
I really someone to be able to have to face the oriental bittersweet vines that grow crazy in Mrs. Smith's yards because those are an invasive species and thus the name of the book. And yet they're not the only invasive species from the book. We are because we are ruining the ocean and we are messing up all kinds of things on land and there's reason to hate us if you are a creature that depends on nature for survival. So, whoever was focusing on eradicating this vine couldn't be the same person who was also fixated on throwing a ginormous, over the top, insanely, almost disgustingly lavish bar mitzvah. So, and then I love coming of age themes in all books. It's absolutely one of my favorite themes. And I
Mine too.
honestly, it's something I tell people who don't read Stephen King when they say, I don't read Stephen King because I don't like horror, I will often say to them, he writes books that aren't horrific, and he really is one of the best coming of age writers of all time, not just now, of all time. He writes age so beautifully. Get out there and read fairy tale then. You don't have to read the horror. But I think all of us love the journey of a coming of age character.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about Jill. She's 12, she's the quintessential middle child, right? Her older brother essentially can do no wrong. He's like the star of the swim team, which she aspires to even get on the team that would be able to compete for trophies. She has a younger brother, Justin, who's just, everybody adores, right? Because he's just little and sweet. So talking about her and her coming of age and finding her sense of self and the relationship she has with her Icelandic housekeeper, Una. Talk a little bit about that dynamic.
So Jill is basically me. I was definitely the kid who never passed the presidential fitness test ever.
I don't think they do that anymore, do they?
No, they don't, thank God. Or if they do, change because I just remember, like, first of all, I'm a super slow runner. I've always been. I'm really just I plod along at things and I will get there in the end. There's no speed with me.
Well, the
And I remember,
reverse arm hang was what always
oh
got
my
me.
gosh, the climb. I would get in the gym and I'd be like, I can't get up there. Like, you want me to move these hips and thighs up there? Like, that's not. But then I'd be friends with people on the school bus who could just scurry up that rope and they were just like, this is easy.
They're also the people, though, that couldn't write a short story on the bus and sell it. I'll just say.
Right. Yeah. So thank you. I like that plug instead. And I really had a terrible reputation as a kid for being a liar. And I have spoken to my parents with this since then and said, well, was I really lying or was I exaggerating to make a story? I
Right.
think it was more like that. And maybe it was a combination of both. But I was really not to be trusted because if I came home and repeated a tale, I always embellished it. I wanted it to be a better story than the way it stood. But this kind of gave me a reputation as not being trustworthy. And I thought, what would it be like to raise a kid like that? To try to kind of look at that from my parents' point of view. And what if that kid came to me and actually said, this person is bad or this person is that? I'm not sure if I would have believed me. And I thought that lack of credibility and that kind of head in the clouds. And I was really obsessed with Greek myth when I was about that age. I was reading all kinds of things that had anything to do with mythological beasts or monsters. Those were the books out of the library. I just honestly devouring that all when I wasn't reading about sharks because I was terrified of sharks. I knew there were no gorgons
Yes.
outside of us, but I wasn't so sure about the sharks because we lived on the water just like this family does. And I was really, really traumatized by Jaws. And I love horror movies. And my parents were so great because they were really open to letting me read whatever I wanted to read. I had no restrictions in the library. I read Stephen King at a very early age. Didn't bother me, loved it. As a matter of fact, I started reading horror novels like with my mom. She would read one and give one to me, and then we would talk about it. And I was very young for that. And well, I mean, maybe it did scar me for life. I am writing some books. So, Jill was really this person who wasn't trustworthy and was obsessed with monsters. But then she's has a connection with Una, who's from Iceland. Iceland is so just replete with folklore. I mean, there are still little houses that they put out for the elves to go into so that the elves don't mess with them. This is just, it's a tradition. They're not all over the place. There's not as many as there used to be, but every boulder that's kind of halfway in between the shore and the water, that's where a troll got caught by the sun. They have a sea monster museum for crying out loud. I mean, this is a
Wow.
culture that is just steeped in wonderful folklore. And we really did have an Icelandic housekeeper who would come in when my parents were both away for more than a night. It was longer than we could be trusted with the babysitter because we were kind of a handful, the three of us. But we were angelic for her because she was just such an amazing person. She was very gentle and extremely kind, and she had this very melodic voice, and she told us great stories. And she really was very much like a fairy tale godmother. She had this long silver hair, sapphire blue eyes, and was just always gentle and sweet. And she was a fantastic cook. We were like, don't ever leave.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, I really liked the character and I liked the dynamic because she seemed to honor who Jill was. Jill's also a writer, which is part of the reason why she can't be trusted. And there's a nice reference in there to the 1980s, like Time Bandits. What would you have done, right? You have this imagination, can't really be trusted, and you say something's bad and nobody really wants to believe you. And so there's this like rapport that she develops with Charlie to kind of work together along with Una. Una honoring who Jill is and I want to say allowing, but giving her permission to be who she is. Cause that's 12 years. It's a tough age trying to figure out where you fit, where you belong, what you like versus what other people like. That is
it
certainly
is.
a
And,
challenge.
and I think that even at young ages, kids who are kind of slanted more toward writing, reading, arts, they also tend to be sometimes unsettlingly observant. So
Mhm.
these are the kids where if you're at a big party, you'll notice them watching the adults and watching. And I think that I had always been somebody like that. I'm still like that. I'm the person at the coffee store where a coffee shop where I'm writing for a little bit and then I'll just kind of like idly watch people because first of all, people are just fascinating. And I like to observe people and I've even as a kid, but you can that can be kind of unsettling too, and then what are they doing with this information? And I think that in stories for ages and ages and ages, the kids have seen the monsters first because
Mhm.
observing them in a different way, they're the ones who are scared. They're the ones who are looking for safety and sanctuary and can be threatened by things that don't feel safe. And it's tradition for the adults not to believe them. I mean, we would not have issues with Pennywise if someone had believed that there was a clown in the sewers.
Well played. Yeah, I agree. To the powers of observation, it kind of made me think a little bit of like a little bit of a Sherlock-esque in terms of her powers of
Or
observation.
in my time, it would have been Encyclopedia Brown because he was my guy.
I forgot about encyclopedia. Yes.
My guy.
Yes. And then going to the library and looking for books. You even point out the call numbers. I mean, my library is Library of Congress. However, the Dewey of the fairy tales and folk tales, you start here and you end up at 398.2. Like, it's like, wow, like Dewey numbers and librarians have this cool role. And the books that they're reading to find information. There's the secret history of Cold Harbor, the town where they live. There's things happening in the pages of the book as they're reading them, which is completely unsettling. So you do this great mix up as a reader where there are scenes where very comfortable, right? You talk about this was one of my other favorites, Justin being Jill's youngest brother in the library with Una. Una knew he was okay because he was over in the children's section scanning his finger on the pages to find the mouse in, Richard Scarry's Busy Town. I thought, oh my gosh, how many times I've done that. So there's the order,
Right, right.
right? The things that we're comfortable with and seeing and have done a gazillion times. And at the same time, you have her over looking at this secret history and very unsettled with the things that are happening in the books and the thing that's, insect that's tapping at the window. You're off kilter throughout the story as a reader, which I'm hoping was your intent. Um, which is great. And at the same time, you ground us in the ordinary things that we're accustomed to. It's a great read. I challenge anybody to be able to put it down.
Thank you. I do love to put books inside of books whenever I can. I hope that's kind of one of my signatures. I don't think I've ever finished a book without mentioning other book titles inside there because they're my life. I mean,
Mhm.
I read them, I collect them, I go to author events just like any other fangirl and line up to say hello and get my
Right.
books signed. It's hard for me not to insert not only my enthusiasm for books, but just that the answers to so much of what we're looking for. they're in there, and if you can find people who believe that with you, and in this novel, it's Una and Jill are going to the library, but also it's kind of a library date for Una and her husband. It's a kind of a state, and I love them as a couple. I think they're just this really sweet, loving, mature couple, and it's kind of like who I want to be when I grow up.
I mean, there's a great line where he doesn't get upset when Una refers to Iceland as home versus Cold Harbor. And just that subtle observation, like, yeah, he doesn't even get upset when I refer to that as home. I just yeah, exactly. Who you think, people should be or, aspire to just to completely understand somebody instead of getting upset like this isn't Iceland's not home. Yeah, it's where you're from, but home is Cold Harbor. Like if it does that, it's just yeah. And yeah, the canvas tote that they take to the library on their weekly visits and how they kind of split up to look at different things and then kind of come back. It's quite fun, to see that dynamic played out. At the same time, Una's incredibly sensitive to Mrs. Smith and the property and the things that are going on with that.
Right. So she kind of breaks the rule of not being the kid that believes in something sinister next door. And that's because she had an experience as a child herself that resulted in great loss. And so I think that when you've been through a trauma as a kid, there's always a part of you that is on edge and a little guarded. You never really are going to get over that. You can heal and you can progress and you can go on to have a satisfying life. But that scarred part of you is just covering up, fear that's never totally going to be gone. And so that makes Una somebody who's willing to believe Jill and also willing to act on it, which takes an incredible amount of courage and a group who would never believe what you were saying.
That's part of the reason why she's one of my favorites in the book. The other thing, and you talked a little bit about it earlier, but I want to kind of circle back to is the tension that exists, and there seems to be a theme of environment and the things that we are doing to it as humans, talking about the poison from engines and factories and underwater cages and mesh tunnels, and that humans had taken so much land from themselves. And this is from the perspective of Mrs. Smith, who enjoys being in the water. Um, and wondering if that was designed on purpose to kind of send a message that's subtle, but at the same time alarming to us as readers.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely wanted to get in a dig about overconsumption and not respecting the environment and climate change. And a lot of that was really based on the changes that I've seen my hometown water ecosystem go through. So I don't live in New York anymore, but I think not long after I moved away, they really started having issues with the lack of oxygen on the Long Island Sound. And wildlife systems that had been there forever, the eels, for example, were dying and horseshoe crabs were dying. When it started affecting humans, when they were no longer able to harvest the oysters and other shellfish that they needed for selling, that's when they started realizing, like, what is happening? Where are all the animals in here going? And so then, of course, they did studies and they found out that all of these companies were dumping into the Hudson River and all this stuff was coming out into the Sound. And I will say that New York did not sit on this. They actually acted. The Long Island Sound is really in recovery,
Good.
which is a story because you don't often get that, but it's still a story that's global, that our water ecosystems, just what beach can you walk on and not see a plastic water bottle or some other detritus like sloshing up on the waves? And that makes me angry. I hate that. I actually really hate littering. And, I'm one of those people of like laser eyes. I would vaporize anybody who I saw littering. That's just a big pet peeve of mine.
Like, yeah.
And we're doing it on a global scale,
And we think, oh, it's just one water bottle, it's just one whatever. But, cumulatively, easy for me to say, it does have an impact. And at the same time, we can take that same cumulative nature of human beings and change and reverse the damage. I am a rower, and so I'm on the river frequently here, the Cuyahoga in Cleveland. And yeah, you're rowing past, and it's sad to see all the stuff that is washing up. And we have an amazing coach who, wears gloves while she's coaching us riding in the launch alongside, who will grab the stuff just so it's not in there anymore.
That's awesome. I love her.
Yeah, so do I, except when she's coaching us really hard.
Right.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm like, look, a water bottle, look, some debris, some garbage.
Look, I think there's a whole cardboard box over there, coach.
That's exactly right. But I'm glad that you brought that up, because the thing that's amazing about this book and the thing that makes me so excited is so many universal themes about women and coming together, to do good or sometimes not so good, what we're doing universally to the environment, what we do or what we've experienced as 12-year-olds in terms of trying to figure out our place in the world and what's important to us. All these universal things, but yet you play them out with such incredible characters. So you see it from a different perspective. You're not just seeing the PSA like littering is bad, but you're seeing the impact that it has on real humans, and there's a face to that problem, right? We understand Mrs. Smith, and that's the great thing, is sharing her perspective on things, as you talked about, like the six faces kind of turning around and being able to see the very same situation, but from different perspectives. It just deepens it. And then at the same time, as a reader, you're like, okay, well, which one is right? Or are they all right? Because we all come with our own experience to things and how we see things.
And
So,
I tend to be somebody who likes a villain in general. I mean, if a villain is well written, tend to kind of side with them. Like, yeah, I get where you're coming from. I think that the best villains are representing angers and frustrations that we're walking around with. It's not like we need to all go out there and start murdering people. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying that their motivation is sometimes something I completely understand, and I often find them the most interesting person in the book. Probably because you can see this slow progression of how disappointments and anger and injustices can twist somebody and change the trajectory of their actions and their lives.
and I also think it's not normally done with a big action. It's normally done with these small little things that when you add up those small little things, that's what creates that gap or that swinging of a pendulum in the opposite direction. I mean, yes, there are big, egregious things that happen. What's happening in the Potomac is egregious, big event. But oftentimes it's the person who just chucks the water bottle or chucks the bag, or the bag blows away and they don't go and get it. Those are the things that just kind of are interesting, and I think we as human beings, for the most part, aren't that much different. It's
Right.
little things that we do that just kinda add up, and then it becomes like our narrative or the narrative for the neighbor who doesn't talk to anybody, house is, like, big but kind of ramshackle. So,
And I
really,
think that any creature, whether human, animal, any creature, if their home is being threatened, they will respond. And that's just not us. I mean, that's animals too. It's so for Mrs. Smith, home, which is the water, is under attack. It's being threatened and she's gonna lash out. And I find that okay.
there's something satisfying about that, because, somebody's taking action to something that is so wrong, and it's that action that draws the attention to what is wrong in the first place. So, I mean, there's a great line. Jill continues writing, right, and her teacher, Mr. Tibby, talks about one of the things that she submitted, and he says to her, who doesn't love a hero? But I think the villains are interesting too. Why are they so angry? Why do they want to hurt those around them? What's the story behind those emotions? And I think not only is that a great quote from your book, but it's also kind of emblematic of this whole story and trying to understand why we do what we do, and how one perception can completely change and turn the events. So, absolutely a
You said
fascinating
that
book.
better than I did. So I'm just gonna let you say that.
No, I mean, it was a fantastic read. I could not put it down, and watching and seeing each perspective and why they're doing what they're doing and how they come to rationalize at times their decisions is absolutely fascinating. It's a terrific, terrific book. So I'm so excited for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I could talk to you the rest of the afternoon.
Yeah,
This is
we just pour some more coffee and go.
Exactly. Talk Lauren Groff and Ann Patchett and I don't know, maybe some French.
And
Yeah.
I think, "Oh, don't even get me started." I knew
Jane
we were
Harper.
yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like they're all launching books this year, and I'm like, this is like the greatest thing ever, for
I'm
sure.
telling you, 2026 is going to be a good book year.
It is a good book year, for
Yeah,
sure.
and we
Yes.
need them more than ever. Thank you, writers.
Yes. I say, yeah, thank you. As a reader myself and as a librarian, being able to put stories in the hands of customers who come in, it's special. It's like being a matchmaker a little bit, finding just the right
100%.
book for that right reader. And
You are a certified bibliotherapist to heal through books.
well, thank you all for writing them. I can't tell you how many times they have healed me or given me a different perspective that I otherwise wouldn't have had. I think there's that sense of safety in a book, and also books facilitate tough discussions because we can talk about the
Mhm.
environment through Mrs. Smith's eyes, not for the person who's sitting directly across the table from us, which also
Right, and if you you're willing to put yourself in uncomfortable scenes, and if you're willing to say, for example, I'm a person who I don't believe in trigger warnings. I feel like I wanna be open to anything because if it makes me uncomfortable, that's something I wanna explore, there's the potential for growth there, and I'm not judging anybody else. There's a million reasons why people respond to trigger warnings. This is just for me. I will read anything because often a book I've thought, "I really don't wanna read this," that I've gotten the most growth from. And I've thought, I would never, ever have experienced this perspective, this experience, this difficulty in my life. And I'm so grateful to this author for making me feel all of these things, even though I hated all of those feelings, because I just grew from that. And I think and hope I'm now a little bit more empathetic than I was before I read that book, even though it was so hard.
I think that's fantastic advice. I think people who read tend to be more empathetic because they have those different experiences, and I think all artwork, writing being a form of artwork and expression, is to elicit emotions and for people to respond viscerally to things, whether it's on the pages in a book or it's a painting on a wall or it's a sculpture. I think we come at things viscerally and it turns something up. And it's when those emotions are turned up that you really need to stop and kind of pause and kind of unpack. I hate to use the word unpack, maybe kind of noodle on it a little bit to figure out why.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really good thing. I had somebody tell me the other day that, challenges are just opportunities for growth. I was like, huh,
You're
guess
like,
that
"That sounds like a needlepoint pillow."
it's exactly right. I'm like, yeah, I need to cross stitch that, right? So as we wrap up, this is storied end, the final 5 questions. So one of the features in Mrs. Smith's house is a stained glass window with, I'm going to say an octopus, but we know there's an extra limb. What would you feature in a stained glass window in your home?
Oh, man, that's tough. I am a crazy cat lady, so there might be a cat sitting on top of a stack of books, probably.
Perfect. What app do you use most on your phone?
I'm gonna have to say it's a tie between Libro FM, because I always have an audiobook going, and I got a plug for Libro FM because they support independent bookstores, and I
Good
love
deal.
them. And then Instagram, because I really do interact with a lot of people on Bookstagram, and it is my happy place because I'm in this little bubble of book people, and I love it.
Good. Okay. The book Una finds in the library is The Secret History of Cold Harbor, the town that they're living in. What town would you like to find a book that contains the secret history of?
That is cool. Maybe the one my mom lives in. So my mom lives about 8 miles up the road from me in a little town called Hillsborough, North Carolina, and it has a very colorful history and a lot of ghosts. So there's been quite a bit of violence there. There are
Oh,
several house, there's a haunted hotel, and it's not like fun romantic ghost stuff. It's like ugly, horrible stuff.
Stephen
But
King like ghosts.
yeah, yeah, well, slaves and unmarked graves,
Mm,
lynched. I mean, and stuff during the Revolutionary War and things happening to indigenous people. It's all really tragic, but it's just so steeped in history and had such an interesting, like, one side of the tracks with money and the other side of the tracks didn't have money. I think that the true history of it is probably not really out there, and it would be a good read.
Absolutely. This book is set in the 1980s. Some of your others are. What is the best part of the 1980s that you wish was still around today?
Well, that
Please
is
don't
so
say shoulder
tough.
pads.
God, no, I hated those. I was a swimmer, so I already had big shoulders. I did not need any more of those. I think I'm gonna have to go for books and movies because there are some super cheesy movies from the '80s that
Yes.
still everybody still loves, and I think, the reason for that is that they were all heroes' journeys.
Yes.
It was very much the Frodo, the Bilbo, like, it's this the
Yes.
who stayed at home could save the world, and the kids could save the world,
Yeah.
and you
Goonies.
have a bunch of friends and get out there, have some cheesy sound effects and cheesy visual effects. I loved it. I love the movies from the '80s.
Agreed. I'm trying to encourage my nieces to watch some of the movies from the 80s.
I showed them to my kids, and they're like, "This is trash. Like, this is trash." I'm like, "Up to your room."
Exactly. And then the final question, what song do you always include on a road trip playlist?
None, because I'm always listening to an audiobook.
Okay, good.
Yeah. I mean, I have, like, music that I associate with books, like, for this book, it's definitely "Eye of the Tiger" by Survivor, because that was our swim team song from
Yeah,
so and that's a classic too, come
it
on.
is a classic. Hear it on
I
and you
mean
can't just not sing along
right,
and
you're thinking
the rest of it.
Rocky, thinking, "I might start exercising today,"
Yes,
but then the song ends, you're like, "I might go to Dunkin' Donuts today."
exactly right. A huge thank you to those of you who are listening, and an even bigger thank you to Ellery Adams for this spectacular story, Invasive Species. Get your copy today, and I have no doubt you will enjoy the story and be caught up in the history, the mythology, and the nostalgia of the 90s. And even hints of mysteries that we enjoyed as young adults and will find it very hard to put down. To know who else is going to be a guest, go to storytocount.com. This is Story to Count with Jen Jumba.